The sea sponge drips as it's passed from hand to hand, soaked in salt water, vinegar, and the bodily waste of dozens of strangers. This isn't some medieval torture device. This is how Roman emperors cleaned themselves after using the toilet. The most powerful men in the ancient world shared the same grimy stick with slaves, senators, and common citizens in Rome's public latrines. Ancient historians like Suetonius documented these practices in clinical detail, though modern textbooks conveniently skip over these passages. But here's what will truly disturb you. This shared contamination wasn't an accident of poverty or ignorance. Rome had advanced engineering, marble palaces, and aqueducts that still inspire modern architects. So why did emperors choose to share toilet sponges? The answer reveals something so fundamentally twisted about power and human nature that it's been deliberately buried for 2 millennia. Every marble statue, every Hollywood epic, every history class has sold you a lie about Roman sophistication. The truth is far more revolting than you can imagine, and it gets progressively worse the deeper we dig. What I'm about to show you will make you question everything you thought you knew about civilization itself. If you think you can handle the reality behind Rome's golden facade, stay with me because the shared sponge is just the beginning of this nightmare. You're probably thinking this has to be exaggerated, right? Hollywood has trained us to see Romans as the pinnacle of ancient sophistication, marble columns gleaming in the sun, toga-clad philosophers discussing virtue, emperors ruling from golden thrones in spotless palaces. Every museum display case reinforces this image with pristine artifacts and idealized sculptures that make Roman civilization look like a sanitized paradise of refinement and culture. But here's the thing about those marble statues you've been admiring your entire life. They were propaganda, carefully crafted to hide a reality so revolting that it would have destroyed the empire's reputation if the truth had spread beyond Rome's borders. The disconnect between image and reality wasn't accidental. It was the most successful cover-up in human history, and we've been buying into it for over 2,000 years. Think about it this way. Every single piece of evidence I'm about to share with you comes from the Romans themselves, their own historians, their own medical texts, their own architectural records that somehow never made it into your high school textbooks. Suetonius wasn't some gossip-mongering outsider. He was the imperial secretary with direct access to palace records and personal correspondence that revealed what emperors were really like when the marble facades came down. Tacitus, another primary source we'll be diving into, was a senator who witnessed these practices firsthand and documented them with the clinical precision of someone who couldn't quite believe what he was seeing either. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Recent archaeological discoveries have confirmed every single horrifying detail these ancient writers recorded, and they've uncovered evidence of hygiene practices that are somehow even worse than what the historical sources dared to document. The Romans weren't just sharing toilet sponges, they had systematized contamination in ways that defy belief, turning basic human functions into communal nightmares that affected everyone from slaves to emperors. What you're about to discover will make the shared sponge look like a minor inconvenience compared to the systematic horror of how an entire civilization organized its most intimate daily routines. And trust me, we haven't even gotten to the truly stomach-churning part yet. Wait until you learn what Roman emperors did to their own bodies in the name of cleanliness. Augustus Caesar was supposed to be the perfect man, the divine emperor who transformed a crumbling republic into the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The brilliant strategist who brought peace to the Mediterranean. The cultured leader who commissioned the most beautiful art and architecture in human history. His official portraits show him as eternally youthful, with flawless skin and a serene expression that radiated godlike authority, and for over 2 millennia, that's exactly how historians have presented him to the world. But what if I told you that behind those marble perfection fantasies, Augustus was so terrified of basic hygiene that he avoided bathing altogether, believing that water would somehow make him sicker than he already was? This isn't speculation or medieval rumor. This comes directly from Suetonius's Imperial biography, written by someone with unprecedented access to palace records and Augustus's personal correspondence. According to these documented accounts, the most powerful man in the ancient world rarely bathed because he thought it was healthier. a decision that left his body in a state of decay that would shock modern medical professionals. Suetonius described Augustus's physical reality with clinical precision. His body was covered with spots, and he had birthmarks scattered over his breast and belly, corresponding in form, order, and number with the stars of the bear in the heavens, also numerous callous places resembling ringworm, caused by a constant itching of his body and a vigorous use of the strigil. Think about that for a moment. The emperor's skin was so damaged by Rome's advanced cleaning methods that it looked like he had a chronic skin disease, with lesions and calluses covering his torso like some kind of medieval plague victim. The strigil, that bronze scraping tool Romans used instead of soap, had essentially flayed Augustus alive over decades of use, leaving him scarred, infected, and desperately trying to hide his physical deterioration from public view. Can you imagine being the most powerful man alive and being afraid of water, knowing that your empire's signature hygiene ritual was slowly destroying your body? But here's what should truly terrify you. Augustus wasn't unique. He wasn't some anomaly among Roman leaders. He was just the beginning of a pattern of imperial degradation that gets progressively more disturbing as we move through the centuries. Now, before we dive deeper into imperial decay, you need to understand the engineering marvel that was supposed to solve all of Rome's sanitation problems, the legendary Cloaca Maxima, or greatest sewer, a system so advanced that modern engineers still study its construction techniques today. Built in the 6th century BC and expanded over centuries, this underground masterpiece stretched for miles beneath Rome, with tunnels so massive that Pliny the Elder described them as large enough to allow the passage of a wagon loaded with hay. The main channels were over 100 meters long, 4.5 meters wide, and 3.3 meters high, essentially underground highways designed to carry waste from every corner of the greatest city on earth directly into the Tiber River. By the 1st century AD, all 11 of Rome's magnificent aqueducts fed into this system, creating a continuous flow of water that was supposed to flush away the accumulated filth of over 1 million residents. The engineering precision was extraordinary. Roman concrete made with volcanic ash created waterproof tunnels that could withstand centuries of use, while carefully calculated, gradients ensured that waste moved efficiently from the forum to the river without backing up or overflowing. This was infrastructure planning on a scale that wouldn't be matched again until the modern era. A testament to Roman ingenuity and their commitment to public health. But here's what they don't tell you in engineering textbooks. This marvel of ancient technology was actually a health nightmare that made Roman homes virtually uninhabitable for anyone unlucky enough to connect to it. The problem was hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas produced by decomposing waste that had nowhere to escape except back up through the very pipes that were supposed to carry filth away from people's homes. Romans quickly discovered that connecting to the sewer meant living with a constant, overwhelming stench that made breathing difficult and created serious fire hazards as the gas accumulated in enclosed spaces. Archaeological analysis conducted in the past decade has confirmed what ancient sources documented: most Romans actually refused to connect their homes to this engineering marvel because the cure was worse than the disease, preferring to deal with waste in other ways rather than turn their living spaces into gas chambers. And here's the visceral reality that will make your stomach turn: recent calculations, based on population density and waste production, estimates suggest that over 1 million pounds of human excrement flowed through the Cloaca Maxima every single day, creating a river of filth beneath the marble splendor that tourists and historians celebrate today. And that's not even counting what happened when the system inevitably backed up during floods or blockages. While Romans were avoiding their own sewer connections, they were simultaneously creating another public health disaster that modern society would consider absolutely unthinkable. The communal bathing system that historians love to praise as evidence of Roman sophistication and social equality. These weren't just buildings with pools, they were massive social complexes where Romans from every level of society gathered daily to conduct business, gossip, exercise, and yes, bathe together in what they believed was the height of civilized living. The importance of bath culture to Roman identity cannot be overstated. It was so central to their conception of civilization that they built elaborate thermal complexes in every conquered territory turning communal bathing into a symbol of Roman superiority over barbarian cultures who preferred to wash privately. By 354 AD, Rome itself contained 952 separate bathing facilities of varying sizes, from neighborhood establishments to enormous complexes like the Baths of Caracalla that could accommodate thousands of people simultaneously. The social ritual was considered so essential that emperors regularly sponsored free bathing days to maintain their popularity with the masses, and when asked by a foreigner why he bathed daily, one Roman emperor reportedly replied, "Because I do not have the time to bathe twice a day." But here's where the horror begins to unfold. Those daily water changes that modern historians casually mention were the only thing standing between Roman bathers and complete biological catastrophe. And even that minimal precaution created conditions that would violate every public health standard imaginable today. Picture diving into a pool that hasn't been cleaned for 8 hours, filled with hundreds of strangers' bodily fluids, oil scraped from sweaty skin, dirt accumulated from daily labor, dead skin cells sloughed off during the scrubbing process, and whatever diseases and infections people brought with them into the water. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor himself, was so disgusted by what he witnessed in these bathing establishments that he wrote in his personal meditations, "Such as bathing appears to thee, oil, sweat, dirt, filthy water, all things disgusting, so is every part of life and everything." Even more horrifying, Roman medical texts confirm that sick people regularly bathed alongside the healthy, with physicians actually prescribing visits to the baths as medical treatment, which meant that diseases were literally being incubated and spread through the water systems that Romans believed were keeping them clean. The medical reality was that these bathhouses had become petri dishes for every communicable disease known to the ancient world, and the Romans kept diving in daily because they couldn't imagine any alternative to communal contamination. If Augustus represented the carefully crafted image of imperial perfection, his successor Tiberius embodied what happened when that facade began to crack under the weight of biological reality. And what we discover about his physical condition will make Augustus's skin problems look like minor cosmetic issues. Tiberius came to power as Rome's most accomplished military commander, a man who had conquered Germania and secured the empire's northern borders through decades of brilliant strategic campaigns that cemented his reputation as the ultimate Roman soldier-statesman. Historical sources describe him in his prime as exceptionally handsome, tall, and physically imposing, exactly what Romans expected from their divine emperor, someone whose very appearance commanded respect and projected the strength of the empire itself. But here's where the story takes a turn that will make your skin crawl. Suetonius documented that even in his adulthood, even as the most powerful man in the world, Tiberius suffered from severe acne outbreaks that covered his face with painful, oozing lesions that no amount of imperial wealth or medical intervention could control. We're not talking about occasional teenage pimples that cleared up with age. This was chronic, disfiguring acne that persisted well into his 70s, leaving his face so scarred and infected that witnesses described him as almost unrecognizable from the handsome general who had once commanded Rome's legions. But wait, it gets so much worse than facial acne, because recent medical analysis of historical sources suggests that Tiberius also contracted what appears to have been a severe case of herpes that spread throughout the empire during his reign, an outbreak so serious that the emperor himself banned kissing at public functions in a desperate attempt to prevent further transmission of whatever disease was ravaging his own body. The medical helplessness of the situation becomes clear when you realize that Aulus Cornelius Celsus, the most respected physician of the era, had essentially given up on treating skin conditions entirely, writing in his medical treatises that attempting to cure pimples and spots was almost a waste of time. Imagine being emperor of the world and having your personal doctors tell you that your face is beyond help. The psychological impact of this physical decay becomes evident in Tiberius's increasing paranoia and self-imposed isolation, retreating to the island of Capri where he could hide his deteriorating appearance from public view while still maintaining the illusion of imperial authority through carefully controlled communications with Rome. But even Tiberius's skin problems pale in comparison to what we discovered about imperial grooming practices that were supposed to maintain the divine appearance expected of Roman leaders practices so disturbing that they make sharing toilet sponges look like a reasonable hygiene choice. Now we arrive at the practices that will fundamentally change how you see every marble statue and imperial portrait ever created, because what Roman emperors did to their own bodies in pursuit of divine perfection makes modern extreme body modification look like gentle self-care routines. Julius Caesar, the man who conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon, was so obsessed with his appearance that Suetonius documented his beauty rituals with the kind of clinical detail usually reserved for describing torture techniques. Caesar wasn't just carefully trimmed and shaved, as polite historians like to phrase it. He was having every single unwanted hair individually plucked from his body by slaves, who spent hours each day managing his escalating pryonagens. Vanity, a process so painful and time-consuming that it essentially became a full-time occupation for multiple servants whose sole job was maintaining Caesar's artificially youthful appearance. But here's the detail that will make you physically recoil when plucking wasn't enough to achieve the soft, hairless skin Caesar demanded. He resorted to using red-hot nutshells pressed against his legs to burn the hair follicles and prevent regrowth, essentially branding himself repeatedly to achieve an aesthetic that he believed befitted a god among mortals. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful military commander in history was voluntarily subjecting himself to controlled burns because he was so terrified of appearing naturally human that he preferred scarification to visible body hair. And this wasn't some isolated case of imperial madness. Newly discovered archaeological evidence from sites across the Roman Empire has uncovered complete grooming tool sets with multiple implements connected like keychains, suggesting that these extreme beauty practices were systematized and widespread among the ruling class. Emperor Otho took a different but equally disturbing approach, applying poultices made of moistened bread to his face every single day from boyhood to prevent beard growth, essentially suffocating his skin with soggy carbohydrates rather than allowing normal masculine hair development that might undermine his claims to eternal youth. But the most horrifying aspect of imperial grooming was the daily strigil ritual that every emperor endured. Imagine having slaves slather your entire body with olive oil mixed with sand or pumice, then systematically scrape every inch of your skin with sharp bronze implements designed to remove not just dirt and sweat, but entire layers of flesh in the pursuit of cleanliness. Archaeological analysis has revealed that these bronze scrapers were sharp enough to cause permanent scarring with regular use, which explains why Augustus's body was covered in callous places resembling ringworm, and why emperors' skin looked like they suffered from chronic dermatological diseases, because they essentially did, self-inflicted through daily ritualistic flaying that they believed was necessary to maintain their divine status. By now, you're probably wondering how it's possible that these documented horrors have been hidden in plain sight for centuries, and the answer reveals a conspiracy of silence that reaches from ancient palace scribes all the way to your high school history textbook. A deliberate, systematic campaign to sanitize imperial reality that has successfully deceived billions of people for over 2,000 years. The most obvious evidence of this cover-up stares at you from every museum wall and textbook illustration. Those perfectly preserved marble portraits of Roman emperors that show them as eternally youthful, physically flawless specimens of divine authority who never seem to age, suffer, or decay despite ruling for decades through lives of documented excess and self-inflicted mutilation. Expert analysis of Augustus's official portraiture reveals something truly sinister. Despite living to the age of 75 and ruling for 45 years, every single statue, coin, and fresco shows him looking exactly the same. Frozen at approximately 35 years old, with smooth, unblemished skin that completely contradicts Suetonius's clinical descriptions of a body covered with spots and numerous callous places resembling ringworm. This wasn't artistic convention or limited sculpting skill. This was state-sponsored propaganda designed to maintain the illusion of imperial perfection by literally erasing physical reality from the historical record. But the visual deception was just the beginning of a much deeper conspiracy that involved systematically suppressing the most damaging evidence of imperial degradation that could have destroyed the entire Roman power structure. Court physicians were required to keep detailed medical records of imperial health, and fragments of these documents have survived in Vatican archives and private collections, revealing observations that were deemed so dangerous to imperial authority that they were classified as state secrets during the emperor's lifetimes and quietly buried after their deaths. These suppressed medical observations describe imperial bodies as diseased, malformed, and physically repulsive in ways that would have made it impossible for subjects to believe in divine imperial authority if the truth had become public knowledge during their reigns. The most damning evidence of deliberate historical manipulation comes from comparing what court insiders like Suetonius documented versus what made it into official imperial biographies and public records. Entire categories of physical ailments, grooming disasters, and hygiene failures were systematically omitted from anything that might be read by future generations, creating a sanitized version of imperial history that bore no resemblance to documented reality. They've been hiding this from you for 20 years, and the complicity extends far beyond ancient Roman spin doctors to include modern historians who have access to these primary sources, but continue to perpetuate the myth of Roman sophistication because acknowledging the truth undermine fundamental assumptions about civilization, progress, and the nature of political power itself. What happens when the most advanced sanitation infrastructure in human history can't keep pace with the biological reality of over 1 million people crammed into a space designed for a fraction of that population? The answer transforms Rome from the marble paradise of tourist brochures into something that resembles a medieval plague city, where the very systems designed to maintain civilization became the mechanisms of its biological collapse. By the 2nd century AD, Rome's streets were so covered in rubbish that stepping stones had to be strategically placed throughout the city just to allow pedestrians to navigate between buildings without wading through accumulated human and animal waste that the overwhelmed sewer system could no longer process. This wasn't occasional litter or storm debris. This was a permanent carpet of organic decay that included food scraps, animal carcasses, human excrement, and industrial waste from the countless shops and businesses that lined every major thoroughfare, creating a putrid landscape that required specialized infrastructure just to make walking possible. The night soil collectors, or stercorarii, emerged as a necessary profession dedicated to manually removing human waste that couldn't be processed through the failing cloaca maxima, carting away tons of excrement in the darkness to sell to farmers outside the city as fertilizer. Imagine the smell of a garbage truck, but filled exclusively with human waste, traveling through residential neighborhoods every single night as part of the city's essential services. But even this desperate measure couldn't address the atmospheric horror that had settled over the greatest city on earth like a permanent fog of decay. Visitors from other parts of the empire documented being overwhelmed by the constant stench that permeated every neighborhood, every building, every public space, a mixture of rotting organic matter, industrial chemicals, and human waste that made breathing an ordeal and turned simple activities like eating or sleeping into exercises in endurance. The situation became even more nightmarish when Romans discovered that connecting to the sewer system meant sharing their homes with the creatures that thrived in the underground waste networks. Rats, insects, and things that witnesses preferred not to describe in detail would emerge from sewer connections, carrying diseases from the tunnels into private residences and turning every toilet into a potential portal for biological contamination. Medical deterioration accelerated as the greatest civilization inadvertently created urban disease factories where cholera, dysentery, and plague could incubate in the waste systems and spread through the water supply, the air, and direct contact with the filth that Romans could no longer escape no matter their wealth or social status. This environmental collapse wasn't just an inconvenience, it was systematically undermining the health, productivity, and psychological stability of the population that sustained the empire, creating the perfect conditions for the social breakdown that would eventually sweep away Roman power forever. So what does it mean that the most powerful men in human history, gods among mortals, conquerors of continents, builders of civilizations, were reduced to sharing toilet sponges with slaves and burning their own flesh in pursuit of impossible physical perfection? The answer reveals something so fundamentally disturbing about the nature of absolute power that it explains not just the fall of Rome, but the inevitable corruption that destroys every empire throughout history. When human beings are elevated to divine status, when they're told that normal biological limitations don't apply to them. When entire civilizations depend on maintaining the illusion of their perfection, they become trapped in a psychological prison that ultimately destroys both their humanity and their ability to govern effectively. The emperors we've examined weren't uniquely depraved or exceptionally vain. They were ordinary human beings forced to live as gods, and the psychological toll of maintaining that impossible standard drove them to increasingly desperate and self-destructive behaviors that would be recognized today as severe mental illness brought on by the absolute corruption of absolute power. Think about the implications for our modern world, where political leaders, celebrities, and corporate executives are subjected to the same impossible standards of perfection, the same pressure to appear superhuman, the same incentive to hide their biological reality behind carefully crafted public images. What are today's powerful figures doing in private to maintain their facades? What modern equivalent of strigil scarification are they inflicting on themselves and others? What contemporary version of shared toilet sponges are they participating in while presenting themselves as civilized and sophisticated to the masses who depend on believing in their superiority? The historical pattern is unmistakable. Every generation of historians, every textbook writer, every museum curator participates in the same conspiracy of sanitization that protected Roman emperors, carefully omitting the disturbing details that would undermine public faith in authority and revealing only the marble perfection that supports existing power structures. They're still doing it today, which means the hidden truths about our current leaders are probably just as revolting as what we've discovered about ancient Rome, and they're being just as carefully concealed from public knowledge to maintain the stability that depends on our continued belief in the myth of civilized authority. The next time you see a marble statue or read about ancient greatness, remember what you learned today. Remember that behind every monument to human achievement lies the same fundamental biological reality that no amount of power, wealth, or propaganda can ultimately escape. Hit subscribe for more hidden truths that powerful people don't want you to know. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the more perfect someone appears in public, the more horrifying their private reality is likely to be. In the end, that shared toilet sponge becomes the perfect symbol of what absolute power really means. Even emperors, even gods among mortals, even the builders of civilizations that lasted for centuries, couldn't escape the fundamental human degradation that reminds us we're all just biological organisms pretending to be something more dignified than we actually are.